If you're using the ferry to cross the Guernsey, I have a small favour to ask. Could you deactivate your car alarm? At various points there are about 4 of them, all like harmonising at once every time the boat pitched left and right, and it's a 3-hour crossing, so that got old really fast. So this is Guernsey. It might not seem quite as exotic as Marrakesh or Kefalonia or some of the other videos we've got coming, but living as I do on the south coast of the UK, it's affordable, it's definitely different, and so yeah, I thought we'd head here next. So you've got a couple of options getting to Guernsey: ferries or flights. Now, as a Bournemouth resident, it seems like a no-brainer. There's a Condor ferry leaving from Poole, which is just a couple of miles away. Now, I know if you're coming from further away, this might not seem like a great shout, but we'll talk about more travel options in a bit. Okay, so the ferry, well, it's okay. The islanders seem to be resigned that it's a bit comically naff. You know that weird design vibe that only exists at leisure centre cafes? You know, sort of a time capsule of the 90s with no self-awareness. It's basically that. But look, hey, it's pretty cheap. I mean, it's $34 for a day return. Do make sure you're more than an hour early. They seem to be craving that sweet, sweet legitimacy that air travel has by insisting that everyone be there and checked in no less than an hour before, including foot passengers, even though you can breeze through security and be on the ferry faster than it takes to say, are you sure this is completely necessary? But please bear in mind, Guernsey is a dependency of the English crown, but they are checking passports. I didn't catch if you can go through on a driving licence, but yeah, don't suggest rolling that dice. Take a passport. The crossing itself was kind of comical. Even though Paris was experiencing a record-breaking heat wave when I filmed this, and the south of England was also baking, the English Channel was staging a minimalist performance of The Tempest. There were various points where the horizon just disappeared. It looked like the boat was contemplating doing a flip, and it meant even the simple act of going to the bathroom made everyone lurch around as if pissed. The view out to the Channel is surprisingly blank over the period of 3 hours. Eventually, you get your first glance of land as the islands of Alderney appear. At a time of day when the sun is just in the right position to wash out all my footage, but in fairness, the cabin movement had already made sure it would be basically unusable anyway. So we got to Guernsey a little bit before 1. This is St Peter's Port, which is the main town on the island. It's quite nice. Very much got that small coastal town charm to it. I mean, it didn't exhilarate me to my very core. I mean, as a Brit, it seems a bit tame compared to the Mediterranean seaside towns in like Montenegro or the Ionian Islands. But then I would say that because I'm the sort of intolerable person who name drops all the places they've been. Don't you hate those people? The people who have the temerity to make videos of the trips they go on? So St Peter's Port is alright. My plan, as you probably caught from the title, is to see if I could complete a lap on foot of the whole island. And if you stick around to the end to find out if I can make it, I failed. Yeah, I did not make it all the way round. So, this is about the time you can be smashing that subscribe button. Now, normally at this point of the episode, we'd have a low-angle shot of a flag flying, but obviously Guernsey being a small island, it doesn't have a flag. Wait a second. Oh, look at that. So, downing a quick coffee, I started my lap heading north. So, to get the cripplingly obvious out of the way, Guernsey isn't in imminent danger of running out of beaches. Living on the south coast of England all my life has burdened me with this infuriatingly posh-sounding voice that makes me sound like a fussy middle manager at a regional Marks and Spencer's. But it also means I've never been far from the beach. So, when I see some sand and water, I don't spontaneously drop to my knees and start making votive offerings to Mithras. But sure, if you've been living in some sort of landlocked, dense urban sprawl like, I don't know, Winchester all your life, then sure, knock yourself out. One of the first things you'll start to notice are all the World War II bunkers, about every 500 metres or so. Actually feeling pretty accomplished, because across Guernsey and the Channel Islands there are literally hundreds of World War II sites, and I filmed some of them. Cue the supercut. Hey, this one even had bullet holes. Unsurprisingly, you can't hug the coast perfectly all around the island. There's a fair amount of coast road, but like any island, you've got to have enough space for the practical, industrial and dock sort of stuff. So yeah, it's not all idyllic sands and cottages. I mean, just look at this warehouse, and this one. And actually that one's quite compositionally pleasing. And this, whatever weird Salvador Dali chimney thing. But once you're past all that bit, you'll get to see Vale Castle. No, not that one. That's actually just... Yeah, okay, I'm actually not sure what that is. I initially mistook that for Vale Castle. It's this one. Yeah, it won't change your life, but it's a nice view, and hey, lighten up, you austere weirdo. What, you've grown tired of castles overlooking the sea? Oh, and I guess sunsets and newborn puppies are just a tedious waste of time. So moving along, there was Bordeaux Beach. Really? well, that's not going to cause any confusion, but okay. I actually ducked inland at this point because one of the main places I want to tick off the itinerary was the Dehus Dolmen. Okay, quick word of explanation. Not dissimilar to our Brittany episodes, Guernsey is a bit of a hotbed of Neolithic sites, and it's got some pretty impressive passage graves, including this one, which is free. It's quite a good system, actually. It's got a door in it and lights inside. It just gets locked at sunset, but otherwise it's open pretty much all the time, it seems. Kept walking, sort of taking it as a given that this was all excessively pretty, through straight up just bad planning. I was actually running low on camera batteries at this point, but the northern part of the island just keep getting better and better, and the beaches got more secluded and more beautiful the further you went. And as mentioned, more fortifications than the outer edge of the Death Star. Pembroke Beach was a real treat, praise Mithras, and if my camera batteries weren't dying, I would have taken more footage. In this northern part of Guernsey, which, fun fact by the way, used to be a separate island entirely till the channel in between was filled in and reclaimed, there is a dense clump of Neolithic sites. Lavard is another passage grave in the middle of the golf course, and yeah, not very well signposted. I'll concede, I just completely missed this sign. I mean, look, this is what happens when my camera batteries are dying and I have to use my phone. Ugh, gross. So yeah, it's a little well hidden, and Google Maps was not going to be helping. Ever since my phone had picked up the signal from the first Channel Island mast it could from the ferry over, Google Maps had been convinced I was in the middle of Alderney, and nothing would change its mind about my location. At this point, with no camera battery left and probably smelling like an elderly shoe left in a bread oven, I jumped on a bus back to St Peter's Port to have dinner with a mate and crashed at his for the night. So next day, I was out of the house at 4:30 in the morning to go see the sunrise. I got to see St Peter's Port in the early light. I was heading south and clockwise at that point. It actually ended up, I was retracing the route I took about 5 years ago when I came to Guernsey for the first time. I did the whole £34 day return ticket and yeah, just stuck around for the 4 hours till the ferry left again, which is, well, that's one way to do it, and it's a nice day if you can tolerate the 3 hours there and then 3 hours back again. So I went past the Clarence Battery, filmed a rabbit, why not, passed through the Bluebell Wood. By the way, this gets a shout out in a lot of the sort of things to do on Guernsey lists, but in case this isn't obvious, it only really counts as a Bluebell Wood in April. The rest of the time, it's just some trees. I mean, nice trees, but don't get too excited.
So I think this is as far as I got last time I was here.
This part of the coast, which includes Fermain Bay, was exquisite, but it's worth pointing out that anything resembling a coastal path sort of stops here, and access to the coast is a bit more piecemeal. Now, I disappoint myself, especially since I am a travel journaliste. But my 4 AM start was starting to catch up with me, and on this remote part of the island, there was nothing going to be open for breakfast much before like 10 AM or something. So I decided to put my circumnavigation of the island on pause and bus it back to St Peter's to grab a bite, which seemed like a reasonable excuse to talk about coffee. So my friend on Guernsey, who's lived there for the larger portion of about 30 years, had warned me that the standard of coffee on Guernsey was not that high, and gonna say, yeah, that was pretty much my impression. For my money, the best was probably this place. I couldn't tell if it was a pop-up or not, hopefully not. They seem to really know their stuff. Had a macchiato from the Woodies kiosk, which was pretty okay. I didn't get a chance to compare it from their main store. So Muse later on. This I was not too crazy about. For a more pricey cafe, when you see a Lavazza logo stealthily appearing, it's not a good sign. And yeah, pretty watery, not too great. If you have no imagination or a paralysing fear of the unknown, there's quite a number of Costas on the island. While it's not an indie, the best coffee with a view was no contest Cornish Bakery on the main street. It's not obvious from the front, but it goes all the way through and with great views of the port, so that was great. The coffee here was, I mean, okay. There was something a bit puzzling about the cortado I couldn't really put my finger on. So, explored a bit up the hill. There's a few spots and gardens, nothing to get too excited about. I mean, if I'd had more time, you can fetch the key for the Victoria Tower from a gallery nearby to take in the view, but after a quick pass across the harbour wall and a quick look at Castle Cornet, it was time to get back on the road to see more of the Guernsey coast. For what it's worth, by the way, for a fairly small island, I was pretty impressed by the bus service. They went pretty much everywhere, regularly, and with, you know, it was really modern, it was only about £1. There isn't a bus stop so much as a mark on the road when you're out in the countryside, so you might even get lucky by just flagging it down from the curb. They even have a £1 note. Was kind of unreasonably excited to receive one of those, but I soon realised I'd have to ditch them pretty quickly before I left the island, and they became unusable again. So we explored a good chunk of the west coast, still in glorious sunshine. We'd been really unreasonably lucky with the weather. Anyone who lives in the UK knows that whatever the promo pictures look like, getting sunshine like this is really hitting the jackpot, even in the middle of summer. I mean, I can't say what Guernsey is like under thick cloud or rain, but with travel to there being as cheap as it is, rather than rolling the dice on booking way in advance, I'd keep this on hand as a last minute when you have a free weekend and the sun is out kind of option. We'll sort of explain a bit more about that at the end. So after more coast walking, we got to the lookout over Liu. If you're not sure where this is, keep an eye out for the Nazi death fortress. It's there. It's an island separated by a tidal causeway. If you want to get to see it, you'll need to keep an eye on the tide timetables. There is a website for it. It's not public land, so sometimes it'll just be closed regardless of the tide. Didn't see any mounted gun emplacements to repel visitors, which is more than I can say for the rest of Guernsey, but yeah, check the visit times first. So, it was nearly time for me to leave. We got as far as Fort Grey, which is white. It's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon now, and I booked a flight back, partly out of curiosity, partly because if you pick your day and time of the week, it's really inexpensive. Although, I mean, this is where we run into the problem of me being so far behind with my episodes. I filmed all this quite a while ago, and in the time it's taken me to finish this, Flybe collapsed. Now, the channel services are run by a subsidiary called Blue Islands, and they seem to have survived, which is, good, but I don't know if all my observations from that time are still going to be true. When I say flying though, bear in mind this is probably out of Southampton Airport or a similar kind of smaller hub, as unlike Jersey, the runway at Guernsey isn't big enough to land large international flights. Speaking of which, I don't want to jinx your travel plans, and if by some fluke you miss your flights, then don't at me. But of all the airports I've ever been to, Guernsey Airport is tiny. There is almost zero chance you will need to be there well in advance, so don't do the Gatwick thing of showing up like an hour and a half early. I mean, look, kudos to the staff for keeping the security brief, and actually they were probably less fussy than the Condor ferry guys, but chances are if you show up more than 2 hours in advance, you'll be left waiting for what feels like an eternity. So that was it, about 27 hours to see as much of the island as I could. I just realised I never showed you the results of my lap. Yeah, so it's not a bad stab at seeing the whole perimeter. Actually, drawing this out on a map, that is quite a bit worse than I thought. It certainly felt like I was covering a lot of ground when I was actually walking it. In my head, it was more like this. So, as it turns out, this southeast corner, there's not necessarily one path that traces the circumference anymore. There's kind of private land, so you might end up doing something, like heading inland for a mile or two, then back out to the coast for a mile or two and back and forth. So, yeah. I saw this bit from the window of the bus. Does that count? I think not. Okay, closing thoughts. I am aware I was very lucky with the sunshine, but as I suggested, if you cross-reference ferry options with flights, you can easily get each leg of the journey for under 40 quid, fairly last minute. And yeah, the more flexible you can be with your timing, the better it's going to be, because if you look at the airport website, you can clearly see there's some times of the day and some times of the week which are much more in demand and more expensive, and some parts which are a lot cheaper. So if you can choose one of those, and then you can sort of get the ferry and the flights to kind of talk to each other and get the cheapest option from both, that's a pretty good way to do it. Just be aware that Guernsey can get pretty rough. As you can see from this sign, they were actually in the middle of a devastating crime wave when I got there. So if you find yourself in a dodgy looking neighbourhood, just keep walking, don't draw attention to yourself. So my abiding impression of Guernsey, well, here's the thing. There's nothing on Guernsey which is the most of anything. There's no one single thing that will blow you away. There's nothing here to make a clickbait thumbnail of like, OMG 17 Guernsey travel secrets you will not believe. But that's not saying it's somehow less. It's something hard to pin down, but just the simplicity of the island makes it really relaxing to spend time there. There's loads of brief moments of excitement with all the neolithic sites, the gun batteries, the rocky coves, and yeah, like more than a week there might start to drag, but as a brief escape and as a place to explore on foot, it was a rush. That's the other thing, by the way. Everyone seems to take their car there on the ferry, and while you could do that, yeah, I mean, it would give you a bit more flexibility, but it's really not that necessary. Of anywhere I've been this year, the extensive bus network and the reasonable walking distances make it hands down the easiest place to get around. Look, I'd suggest just leave the car at home. Anyway, having done Guernsey, that was, well, kind of moorish, so it doesn't take much for guess to where I was going to be heading next. I mean, obviously, having walked Guernsey, the logical thing to do was to head to the tiny island of Jethu. Jethu is located just south. It's Jersey. Obviously, it's Jersey. So we'll be back in the Channel Islands for the next episode, but in the meantime, if you enjoyed the music in the background, it's lifted from the Channel Islands EP and some of the other tracks we've made, which are all up on Bandcamp. If you want to support the channel, that is the best place to do it. Catch you guys soon, and all the best.